Hello. I thought I would just spend a couple minutes discussing why applying, spiritual principles and specifically law of attraction principles. You could also just call them psychological principles. Is a very subjective, individual thing. You know, it's ironic that I've been recently making so many critical videos about law of attraction concepts. But really, most of my criticism is focused on this community, quote unquote community that we see, where it really puts these ideas in a box. And that's just so foolish, as I've spoken about again and again. Any type of spiritual practice or any type really of self-improvement practice is going to be highly subjective, meaning that your own individual makeup and experiences are going to shape what occurs for you. And one reason that I like H. Emily Cady so much when it comes to talking about LOA principles, I just had an episode where I was referencing her work again, is because she says, listen, this is different for every person. God manifests through you in different ways, depending on who you are, and that's all good. And it's not a process where we need to judge someone's manifestations versus somebody else's and say, this is how you do it, this is how you don't do it. It's all good. It's all God, right? If you've been following my stuff at all, you probably already believe this and understand this. And it's just, I guess what I'm trying to say and why I harp on this point so much is that, particularly from just like a personal spiritual angle, your individual experiences are all that matter. And we beat ourselves up because we're not like the next person or the person that we read about on Reddit or the person on YouTube or the person leaving a comment on YouTube about, oh, I manifested this thing in this certain way. That's great. That's awesome. Good for them. But what that comment or video or post or whatever doesn't tell you is that person's makeup and individually what happened to them prior to all that. And who you are is God, because God is everything, right? And so who you are is perfect already. This is what we always discuss if you look at this from a spiritual angle. And improving your life is just a perceptive thing, right? Because there's nothing really to improve when it comes to being God already. And so if you're trying to compare your own creation to someone else's, you're doing it through your own subjective human eyes. But through God's eyes, it's all good. And this is not a process that needs to be rushed. You don't have to try to put it into a box and says, well, this person visualizes a certain way. This person does affirmations in a certain way. I should be doing this a certain way every day. You got to figure out what works for you based on your subjective sensibility. This is a subjective, not objective practice. Because the objective is God and all's good. So there's nothing you have to do. The subjective is what you want to do to improve your life. But it's all good. And if we want to use more psychological terms to talk about this, we could just say that, your past experiences, your past traumas, whether they be big traumas or quite often small, minor, traumas that you had growing up, are going to shape how you are able to work with yourself. And learning to deal with your thinking in a more mature, holistic way where you don't feel quite as overwhelmed and freaked out about it all the time is very, very helpful. And you might think, well, that sounds judgmental, Tim saying that, I'm overwhelmed by my thinking all the time. I don't mean that. I'm just saying that we have a tendency to get overwhelmed by our thinking. and recognizing that more and being okay when you start to realize that, oh my gosh, I'm feeling really overwhelmed now. This isn't the end of the world. I'm just a little bit overwhelmed. That helps. And that comes back to looking at it from a spiritual angle where it's like, well, that's God. It's all God. You feel overwhelmed. So what? You feel overwhelmed. I know it sucks, but that's subjective. And you'll get through that if you just persist. Because the objective is always good. The objective is God. It's interesting to compare different approaches. I'm fascinated by doing that. But when we compare our own individual speed in which we get something that we want, we tend to beat ourselves up. And there's no need to do that. And when we think we're doing something wrong, we're often doing something right if we're more patient and allow ourselves to have the process play out naturally. I hope this made some sense.